I wanted to touch on and talk about Exodus. This game has been generating excitement among a growing number of people. Even though it's been a bit of a slow burn, it was first announced at last year's Game Awards, and while the initial buzz was big, the follow-up news has mostly flown under the radar. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think many people have really been paying attention to the details. A lot of the updates were focused on world building, things like the different races and the lore, and while it is interesting, they weren't necessarily headline grabbing. Now what's cool about Exodus is that it's been slowly building momentum, and the core premise is fantastic. In fact, the premise itself is much simpler than the full scope of the game, which makes things easier to appreciate. Now there's also a lot of talent behind this project, veterans who worked on some of our favorite games, but have since left the big name studios like Ubisoft, Square Enix, and PlayStation. Now these studios still have a name recognition, but many of the people who built that legacy have moved on to create something new and fresh. Exodus is one of those games that comes from a team of incredibly skilled developers, many of whom are legends in the industry, and that's a part of why this game is quite exciting. Now, I want to touch on regarding of this gameplay trailer that just dropped recently. It's about a minute and a half long, and while it doesn't dive super deep, it gives us a solid look at the game. If you're a fan of Mass Effect, you're going to feel right at home with this one. The trailer oozes Mass Effect vibes, from the combat to the overall aesthetic. It even has the same mix of powers and gunplay that fans of Mass Effect will recognize immediately. The melee finishers and flashy abilities shown in the trailer further reinforces that kind of comparison. But Exodus isn't just a Mass Effect clone, it's building its own identity with some really interesting ideas. One of the standout features is how time works in this game. The decision you make will have long-term consequences, not just for you, but for the world around you. For an example, while only a day or two might pass for your character, years or even decades could pass for others. This adds a layer of weight to your choices, as what might feel like a small decision to you could drastically shape the future of the characters and factions you interact with. It's a fascinating concept that opens up all kinds of storytelling possibilities. Visually, the game looks polished and full of potential. The combat, the dialogue scenes, and the overall world design all show that this isn't some low-budget attempt to recreating a magic of Mass Effect. It feels like a fully realized vision with strong foundations. That said, I still think we need to see a little bit more. While a short trailer can make any game look good, what really builds confidence is the uncut gameplay footage. I'd love to see solid half-an-hour gameplay where they show us the mechanics in action, things like the dialogue system, how choices impact the story, the user interface, and how the companions functions during the combat. A full quest playthroughs would go a long way in giving us a little bit of a better understanding at what Exodus has to offer. Oh, speaking of about companions, the game allows you to bring two with you, which is another nod to Mass Effect. Now the trailer did a great job of showcasing the powers and abilities you'll have at your disposal, as well as the dynamic between the characters. It's clear that the team behind the game understands how to balance combat with storytelling, which is crucial for a game like this. The mix of powers, gunplay, and strategy use of companions looks like it could be quite a lot of fun. Now let's touch on and talk about the timeline for this game. While there's been speculations that Exodus could release in 2025, I'm honestly not too sure about that. The developers haven't confirmed the release year yet, and based on what I have seen so far, I would not be surprised if this is actually closer to 2026 or even further. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Good games take time, and I'd rather they get this right than rush it out the door. However, it's important to manage expectations. With a game of this scale, there's always a risk of delays or setbacks, so it's best to stay cautiously optimistic. Now, one thing I'm curious about is how Exodus will stack up against the next Mass Effect game. There are two bound to draw comparisons, especially since Exodus seems heavily inspired by Mass Effect. If Exodus comes out first, it could set a high bar that Mass Effect will have to clear. On the other hand, if Mass Effect releases first, it might steal some of the Exodus thunder. Either way, it'll be interesting to see how these two games coexist in the same space, especially since both are being developed by the teams with ties to the original Mass Effect trilogy. In conclusion, Exodus is shaping up to be a game worth keeping an eye on. It's got a talented team behind it, an intriguing premise, and gameplay that looks both fun and familiar in the best of possible ways. While there's still a lot we do not know, what we have seen so far is promising. As the game gets closer to release, we will learn more. I think it's going to gain more attention and become one of those games people talk about for years to come. And for now, I'm excited to see how it develops, and I'll keep my eyes on some of the interesting updates. And of course, if you're a fan of the story-driven RPGs or just looking for something fresh and ambitious, Exodus is a definite game to watch. Now, do let me know as well down in the comments, like what are your thoughts. Don't forget, of course, to like and subscribe. See you guys all, and yeah, have a wonderful day.